All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It is good to be with you. I am so thankful to be with you all this morning. I'm thankful to have the opportunity to share this story. So thank you to Pastor Aaron for letting me and letting us, the community, open up and share people that have impacted our faith. And the person I'm going to talk about today, his name is Matt. And as some of you know, I'm getting married in October. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. There's so much to do. But my fiance and I are very excited. We're thankful. And even before I met my fiance, even before I have any of these wedding plans in place, I always knew that I wanted my friend Matt to help facilitate the wedding, to be the officiant. Is that the right word? Officiant. And I always knew that because he's been such a big part of my life. He's been such a big part of my story that I thought it would be appropriate for him to help facilitate on that day. Now, I first met Professor Matt Hewitt at Southeastern University, which is an evangelical school in Florida, which was interesting. At the time, that's absolutely what I wanted. I grew up in the evangelical church, and I wanted more evangelical Christianity after high school. I didn't have enough of it. I wanted more of it. I thought that it was the end all be all, and I wanted it. So this school was interesting. You signed things like that you wouldn't, drink alcohol, that you wouldn't have sex. There's mandatory chapel that you went to. There's Bible classes. It was a really interesting place. And so I first heard about Professor Matt Hewitt my freshman year, and he was a very polarizing professor. I didn't have a class with him, but some people I knew did, and some people loved him. They thought that he was awesome, and some people were really critical, and they were saying things like that he's not biblical, or that he's a heretic, or maybe a troublemaker, right? And so now when I hear those things, I'm like, yes, I want to get to know that person. But at the time, I was not like that. At the time, I was like, ooh, I don't think I want to get into that. That scared me, right? I didn't want anything to do with something that could take away from my strong faith. And so I was fearful of Matt, and I kind of stayed away. But my sophomore year, I joined something called the Department of Spiritual Formation. It was a part of student life, and they were responsible for putting on events around campus. And Matt Hewitt was in charge of the Department of Spiritual Formation. So I had to hang out with him, right? I had to hang out with this guy, even though some people were saying that he was heretical. And so during that time of getting to know Matt, I just had an opportunity firsthand to witness this heresy, right? And what that heresy looked like was loving people unconditionally. And what that heresy looked like was building and creating authentic community in a place where not many other people were doing that. And I think deep down, even before I could articulate it, I knew that that was not heretical at all, that was actually God, that he was putting into practice the things that the faith taught us in a way that was much more authentic than all these other professors who had the truth, right? Who had the right doctrine, who had the right orthodoxy, but that weren't building that community, right? Pastor Aaron said this morning, God is always calling us into relationship and community. And I saw that with Matt. So then I was like a little confused because I think I was like, oh, I thought this guy was supposed to be like a heretic. And I see him being quite like Jesus in a way. And so I began to realize that maybe my evangelical faith didn't have it all figured out. We also went on a Mexico missions trip together. I just saw, again, relationship building, community, and joy. And I was even more confused. And so during my junior year, I went on a trip, a 3-month trip to Central America. I was able to backpack through Central America with my friend. It was an amazing trip. It was a meaningful trip. It changed my life in a variety of ways. And right before my trip, Matt and I had grown pretty close. And he gave me a journal so that I could record my experiences. And it was very appropriate that he did this because it was a trip of deconstruction. And he was a person that was always pushing people to deconstruct their faith, which is scary at first, but ends up being something beautiful, I think. And so during this trip, I myself was being deconstructed in a number of ways. The faith of my youth was dying, and I didn't know what to do with that, and it was really scary because that was my whole identity. That was all that I knew. And so, everything was like torn down, and I didn't know who I was or what to do with that. I was in this quasi relationship that wasn't really working out. So that was being deconstructed. My grandmother passed away. Like everything in my life was happening all at once. And so I just wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote in this journal about my experiences. And this trip culminated in an experience in a garbage dump in Nicaragua. Yeah, it was very symbolic of my life at that time. I've shared this before. Some of you might have heard this, but in Managua, which is the capital of Nicaragua, there's a municipal garbage dump where like 700 families live. After the earthquake, there's a big earthquake in the 1970s. Some of you might know the story of Roberto Clemente, the famous Pittsburgh pirate who died while trying to give humanitarian aid to the people that were affected by this earthquake. And so there was this huge earthquake, and the government was corrupt, and so people that had insurance through the government weren't insured. It was a mess. And so a number of people ended up having to go to the dump where they could recycle things and make a little bit of money, and then they just stayed there, and it was like generational. And so families had lived there for years. And so my friend and I met this missionary that lived and worked in the dump. And so we would go every day and just hear these people's stories and see firsthand their pain and firsthand their suffering. And one day I just remember standing in the middle of the dump, and I looked around and I saw like fires burning incessantly and the smoke billowing up. I saw dogs, three-legged dogs, like scrounging for food and like snapping at each other. I saw like naked babies walking around with like garbage and glass and fire. And the scripture came to me, that hell is a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I thought, oh shit, sorry. I thought, I am in hell right now, right? To me, it had always been this theoretical place where you go after you die, something in the future, but it was very present in that moment. And that was a moment that really changed how I thought about my faith. And concepts like salvation and resurrection and restoration took on a whole new meaning. It took on a much more tangible, much more present meaning and significance rather than just some theoretical place where you go after you die. And I was very sad in that moment. There's a lot of emotions, but I was also very excited to share that with people back home. And I knew that I wanted to talk to Matt about it right away. And so I could talk a lot about Matt. I'll just wrap up with this though. Matt has taught me a lot of things about the faith. He's taught me that God is bigger than anything I could ever imagine. I think actually the first time I heard maybe a different pronoun for God was from Matt. And at first I'm like, what are we doing? And then it's like, wait a minute, if God exists, then he or she or they are bigger than anything that we could possibly articulate with our words, right? And Matt also taught me that God is constantly trying to kill me. So happy Sunday. No, but that's okay, because I think that our faith and scripture continually teaches us that out of death, usually something new and beautiful is often born. And it's hard because you're not used to that. I wasn't used to that as an evangelical Christian. It was very positive. It was very optimistic. It was very God's in control. It was very, follow God's will. I know things are hard, but God is in control. And all these platitudes that aren't really meaningful, but that you tell yourself to get through it, right? And so I just came face to face on that trip with some of the things that Matt was teaching me, like things like pain and sadness and real and authentic death. And God is constantly trying to kill us, and that is okay. And there's, in the journal that he gave me on the trip, there was a quote by a Danish philosopher named Soren Kierkegaard. And this quote says, "Now with God's help, I shall become myself." And I think more than anything, my relationship with Matt has helped me become a more authentic version of myself. And so I am very thankful to Matt. I am very thankful to this community as well for helping me to continually become myself, and may we always do that. Thank you.